I'm Claire Jennings, 30 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've dreamed of owning a home that felt like it belonged to me in every sense of the word. Not just a roof and four walls, but a space that reflected who I was and what I had worked for. That dream took shape in Portland, Oregon, when I stumbled across a tired old Victorian house 3 years ago. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and the floors creaked like they were carrying secrets. Most people would have seen a money pit. I saw potential. I hadn't reached that point easily. My 20s were a blur of long nights and tight budgets. I worked as a graphic designer for an agency that specialized in branding for eco-friendly companies, exactly the kind of work I had always wanted, but the pay was modest at first. So, I stretched every dollar. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a shoebox, rode the bus instead of owning a car, and spent weekends freelancing just to build a little savings. While friends traveled to Europe or upgraded to newer cars, I counted coins at the end of the week and reminded myself, someday this will matter. When the house finally became mine, I cried sitting on the porch with the keys in my hand. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was mine. The kitchen smelled like mildew, one upstairs window was shattered and patched with cardboard, and the garden looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But the bones were solid: tall ceilings, stained glass windows, a staircase with carved banisters, and oak floors begging to be refinished. I promised myself I would bring it back to life piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck. My parents didn't quite get it. 4 bedrooms for one girl? My mom said, raising an eyebrow when I invited them over the first time. Seems excessive. My dad laughed and muttered something about me rattling around in an empty house. My older brother Ryan, on the other hand, snorted and asked if I planned to turn it into a boarding house. That was Ryan in a nutshell: quick to mock, slow to work. He was 4 years older, charming in a careless way, and somehow the sun always seemed to shine a little brighter on him in my parents' eyes. I ignored the comments and got to work. Every spare weekend was dedicated to sanding, painting, and hauling trash to the curb. I learned how to rewire light fixtures by watching YouTube videos, spent hours staining wood until my hands smelled like varnish for days, and even tackled the garden, digging up stubborn weeds that had roots like thick ropes. Each improvement made me feel more anchored, more alive. The house wasn't just shelter, it was proof that the sacrifices of my 20s hadn't been for nothing. One room in particular became my sanctuary, the second-floor studio with a massive bay window that caught the morning light just right. I set up my drafting table there, stacked my design books on refurbished shelves, and lined the sill with little plants I kept forgetting to water. It was messy, chaotic, alive, and entirely mine. On the hardest days, when clients were impossible or deadlines felt crushing, I would sit in that room with a cup of tea, sunlight pooling at my feet, and think, this is why I worked so hard. Owning that house also changed how I saw myself. I wasn't just the reliable one in the family anymore, the one who always had her bills paid on time, who remembered birthdays, who quietly picked up the check when things got tight for someone else. I was a homeowner. A restorer of old beauty. A woman building a future on her own terms. And even if my family didn't always say it out loud, I thought deep down they'd be proud of me. But pride was something my family never gave freely. Ryan's triumphs, no matter how small, were celebrated like victories. Mine were treated as expected. When Ryan managed to hold a job for 6 months straight, Mom gushed about his dedication. When he announced his engagement, they threw a party that could have doubled as a small wedding. Meanwhile, when I showed them the freshly painted parlor walls I had labored over for weeks, all I got was, well, that's nice. It stung, but I told myself it didn't matter. The house didn't need their approval. It only needed mine. I imagined a future within those walls, friends gathered for dinners I'd cook in a gleaming kitchen I had designed myself, late nights working on freelance projects in my sunlit studio, maybe even a family of my own someday. I pictured laughter echoing down the hallway, music floating from the parlor, and a garden bursting with life again. It wasn't just a house. It was my independence carved into wood and stone. Of course, I had no way of knowing then how quickly the security I felt could be shattered. How one early flight home from Los Angeles would turn everything upside down. How the people I thought I could trust most, my own family, would test not just my patience but my very sense of belonging in my own home. But that part of the story comes later. For now, I was still living in the glow of ownership, still believing that love, even in its complicated form, would protect the boundaries I had worked so hard to build. I was wrong, but I didn't know it yet. The client meetings in Los Angeles had gone better than expected. For weeks, I'd been preparing design mock-ups for an eco-conscious furniture brand, and when the presentation wrapped earlier than scheduled, my boss gave me the green light to fly home instead of waiting out the last 2 days. I couldn't book the ticket fast enough. All I could think about was slipping back into my bed, drinking coffee in my own kitchen, and maybe spending the weekend tinkering with the parlor shelves I'd been meaning to finish. My flight landed just after noon on a Friday. The sky in Portland was gray but mercifully dry, and the rideshare dropped me off in front of my house before 2 o'clock. I remember smiling at the sight of it, the fresh coat of sage green paint I'd worked on last summer, the porch swing I'd restored hanging steady in the cool breeze, the garden beds lined with perennials starting to peek through the soil. Coming home early felt like a gift. That feeling vanished the second I noticed the driveway. My parents' Subaru was parked crooked near the curb, and beside it was Dad's pickup truck with the bed half lowered. At first, I froze. My stomach flipped through scenarios. Had something happened? Was there an emergency? My parents didn't usually drop by unannounced, and definitely not in both cars. I grabbed my suitcase and hurried toward the porch, telling myself it had to be something small. Maybe they'd brought over leftovers or decided to help with the yard. But when I stepped inside, my optimism died. The entryway was crowded with cardboard boxes, some flattened against the wall, others already packed and taped. The hall closet stood open, empty hangers swinging inside like little ghosts. I could hear voices in the kitchen. My mom's laughter drifted out, followed by the sound of packing tape snapping against cardboard. "What the?" I muttered under my breath, dragging my suitcase across the threshold. In the living room, Dad was crouched under the television, fiddling with wires and a screwdriver. My framed diplomas, once proudly displayed on the wall, leaned against the sofa like discarded junk. "Dad?" My voice cracked with disbelief. He turned, startled for a second, then broke into a smile. "Claire. You're back early. Surprise." "Surprise?" My throat tightened. "What are you doing in my house?" Before he could answer, Mom appeared in the doorway, a roll of bubble wrap in one hand and one of my dinner plates in the other. She grinned as if this were the best news in the world. "Claire, honey. You weren't supposed to see it like this. We wanted it all ready before you got home." "All ready for what?" My suitcase slipped from my hand. She gestured around the half-disassembled room. "For your move, of course. We found you the cutest loft downtown. You'll love it. So close to your office, and no wasted space. This place is far too big for one person." The words hit me like a punch. My move. The cutest loft. Too big for one person. I blinked, hoping I'd misheard. "You, what?" "I'm not moving." Dad set the screwdriver down and dusted off his hands. "Claire, don't get worked up. It's a win-win. You don't need 4 bedrooms all to yourself, and Ryan and Jenna need space with the baby coming. They've been searching for months, and nothing's in their budget." Then it hit us, the solution was right here. My heart pounded in my ears. Ryan. Of course. My older brother, who had never once held down a steady job but somehow always landed on his feet. My parents' golden child. I felt the air leave my lungs. "You've got to be kidding me." Mom stepped closer, her tone soft but firm. "We're helping you, sweetheart. That loft is perfect for someone your age. Bright, cozy, and just 15 minutes from the agency. You'll thank us once you're settled." I stared at them, struggling to process the absurdity. They had gone through my house, boxed up my belongings, and signed a lease in my name without telling me. My house, The house I'd poured years of sweat and sacrifice into was being prepared for someone else to live in. Where's my stuff? My voice came out sharp, shaking. We've already taken a few loads downtown, Dad said proudly, as if he'd accomplished something monumental. The loft's coming together nicely. Small, but perfect for one person. I rushed upstairs 2 steps at a time. My bedroom was still intact, but my office, the room with my drafting table and reference books, was nearly gutted. Boxes of my design materials sat stacked by the door. Half the shelves were empty. My heart sank when I noticed a gap where my leather-bound design anthology had been. That collection had cost me over $3,000, a gift to myself after a big freelance contract. Gone. Where are my books? I demanded when I stormed back downstairs. Oh, we took those over yesterday, Mom said breezily. They're at the loft. Honestly, Claire, they're so heavy, and the shelves there are limited. You might not even need them anymore. My hands shook as I pointed toward the open file cabinet by the desk. And that? Did you go through my private papers? Dad glanced at Mom. We needed some information for the lease. Emergency contacts, bank details, that sort of thing. Don't worry, we handled it. The room tilted. You forged my signature? Claire, we're your parents, Mom said in that condescending tone that made me feel like a child again. We know what's best for you. It's not like we're strangers. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. My sanctuary, the home I had bled for, was being stripped and handed away like it was nothing more than a hand-me-down sweater. And all of it without my consent. The front door swung open. Ryan walked in, his arm looped around Jenna, who balanced paint swatches in one hand. His face lit up. Hey, sis. Back early? Perfect timing. We were just picking colors for the nursery. What do you think, sage green or pale yellow? Jenna smiled shyly, her pregnant belly obvious beneath a loose dress. This house is going to be wonderful for the baby. Thank you so much, Claire. My heart dropped into my stomach. They weren't just planning to move in. They already believed it was theirs. I stood frozen in the entryway, watching Ryan and Jenna breeze past me as if I were a guest in my own home. Ryan dropped the paint swatches on the coffee table like he owned the place. We're thinking the smallest bedroom upstairs for the nursery, he said casually. And maybe we'll knock out that wall between the dining room and kitchen for a more open flow. What do you think, Jenna? She ran her hand over her belly and smiled. It'll be perfect once the baby arrives. Perfect. My chest burned. Perfect, because my house, my work, my sacrifices, were apparently theirs now. I think you've all lost your minds, I said flatly. Mom looked startled, as if my reaction was unreasonable. Claire, don't be selfish. Your brother has a family to think about now. Selfish? My voice rose an octave. This is my house. Mine. I bought it. I pay the mortgage. And you're packing it up like I'm some tenant who overstayed her welcome. Dad set down his screwdriver and straightened his shoulders, using that stern tone he reserved for when I wasn't falling in line. Enough. This is happening. You don't need all this space, Claire. 4 bedrooms for one single woman is excessive. Ryan and Jenna will put it to better use. Ryan leaned back on the sofa with a smirk. Come on, Claire. Don't be dramatic. It's just a house. You'll get another someday when you settle down. Something inside me cracked. Just a house? This house represents every sacrifice I've made for the last decade. The nights I skipped dinners out, the vacations I didn't take, the weekends I worked double shifts. And you think you can just waltz in and take it because you decided to have a baby? Jenna's face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. I knew this was too good to be true, she whispered, clutching Ryan's arm. We'll be stuck in that apartment with a newborn, and Claire doesn't even care. Mom immediately rushed to her side, wrapping her in a hug. Don't upset yourself, sweetheart. Think of the baby. Claire just needs time to adjust. Adjust? My life was being stolen from under me, and I was the one expected to adjust? You've already told them they could move in, haven't you? I demanded. Dad crossed his arms. They've given notice at their apartment. The lease is signed for the loft. Everything is arranged. It's too late to turn back now. My stomach lurched. You forged my signature. That's fraud. Illegal. Don't throw around big words, Dad snapped. We're your parents. We know what's best for you. I laughed bitterly. What's best for me? You think forcing me out of my home into a shoebox loft I didn't choose is best for me? Or is it just best for Ryan, as always? The room fell silent for a moment, the tension buzzing like electricity. Ryan broke it with a scoff. You always think you're better than everyone else because you've got a steady job and a fancy house. Well, newsflash, Claire, you're not. I don't think I'm better, I shot back. But I do think I deserve basic respect. And that includes not having my house given away without my consent. Jenna sniffled, wiping at her eyes. You're cruel. Stress isn't good for the baby. Mom glared at me, her voice sharp as glass. Now look what you've done. Heat rose to my face, tears stinging the back of my eyes. I wanted to scream, to shake them until they saw how insane this was. Instead, I forced myself to speak slowly, deliberately. Everyone needs to stop what they're doing right now. Put down the boxes. This is my house. I did not agree to move out, and I sure as hell did not agree to give Ryan and Jenna my home. Mom's expression hardened, her arms tightening around Jenna as if I were the threat. Claire, be reasonable. The loft is already paid for, the deposit, the first month's rent. We used your emergency fund account to cover it. My jaw dropped. You went through my financial documents? Dad's tone turned icy. We had to. You weren't cooperating. We thought it would be easier to present it as a done deal. I could hardly breathe. Easier for who? For you? For Ryan? Because it sure as hell wasn't easier for me. Stop being dramatic, Ryan cut in. It's not like we're strangers stealing your identity. We're family. Family doesn't forge signatures, I snapped. Family doesn't pack up someone's life without permission. Family doesn't steal. The word steal seemed to strike a nerve. Dad's face flushed red. We're not thieves. Don't you dare say that to us. You're taking my home. What else would you call it? Jenna sobbed louder, and Mom patted her back soothingly. Don't worry, sweetie. Claire will come around. She always does. Then she turned to me, her eyes sharp and accusing. But if you don't, Claire, you're choosing a house over your family. Is that really who you want to be? The manipulation was so familiar it almost worked. Almost. For years I had been the one to cover Ryan's car repairs, to loan Mom and Dad money for roof leaks, to help Jenna when her insurance didn't cover dental work. I'd been generous, over and over. And now, when I finally said no, I was painted as the villain. I felt my hands curl into fists. This isn't about the house, I said, my voice shaking. It's about respect. It's about boundaries. And you've crossed every single one. Ryan stood, towering over me, his face twisted with anger. So that's it? You're going to let your pregnant sister-in-law suffer in a tiny apartment while you sprawl out in 4 bedrooms all alone? Real nice, Claire. Real sisterly. Maybe you should have thought about where you'd raise a family before deciding to have one, I said coldly. Gasps filled the room. Jenna cried harder. Mom shot me a look that could kill. Dad's jaw clenched like a vice. In that moment, I realized something chilling. They truly believed I owed them this. That my sacrifices, my years of work, my very identity as the responsible one, existed solely for them to exploit. They didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. And if I didn't put my foot down now, they would never stop. I don't even remember walking up the stairs. One moment I was glaring at Ryan as Jenna sobbed into Mom's arms, and the next I was in the upstairs bathroom with the door locked, my back pressed against the cool wood. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the faucet. Cold water splashed into the sink, and I cupped it to my face, trying to steady my breathing. The mirror didn't comfort me. My eyes were red, my cheeks blotchy, my hair sticking out from the humid flight I'd barely had time to recover from. I looked less like a woman in control of her life and more like a cornered animal. And in some ways, that's exactly what I was. My mind spun back through every moment of my childhood and adulthood that had led to this. Ryan crashing his car at 18, and my parents raiding my college savings to bail him out. The art awards ceremony they skipped because Ryan had a minor fender bender the same day. My graduation, where they left immediately afterward to help him prepare for a job interview he didn't even get. Every time my needs were minimized because his were somehow more urgent. And me, the good daughter, the reliable one, the fixer, accepting it. Because if I didn't, the guilt would crush me. Because family came first, they said. Because Ryan needed it more. Now they were trying to take my house. Not asking me. Not discussing options. Just deciding for me, because they thought they knew best. Because, in their eyes, I didn't deserve the right to say no. I gripped the edge of the sink so tightly my knuckles went white. This isn't love, I realized with startling clarity. This is control. This is exploitation dressed up as family duty. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. I couldn't let them see me broken, not again. They thrived on that weakness. They'd push and push until I caved, just like always. If I wanted this to end, I had to do something I'd never done before. Something terrifying. I dried my face with a hand towel, took a deep breath, and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad, heart pounding. Calling the police on my own family felt unthinkable. Wrong. Like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But what was my alternative? Let them strip my house bare? Let them move Ryan and Jenna in while I shuffled off to a loft I never agreed to? Let them forge my signature and raid my bank account without consequences? No. Enough. I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice almost broke me. My throat closed for a moment, but I forced the words out. I need to report people in my home who refuse to leave. They've taken my belongings without permission and forged my signature on documents. I need help. The operator asked for my address, details, whether there were weapons. I answered mechanically, my body numb but my voice firm. When she assured me officers were on their way, I hung up and leaned against the wall, shaking from head to toe. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the confrontation about to come, or the permanent shift it would cause in my family. Either way, there was no going back. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway. My legs felt unsteady as I descended the stairs, but my resolve carried me forward. Downstairs, they were still talking about renovation plans as if my protests hadn't even happened. Ryan was describing how he'd turn my design studio into a man cave. Jenna was debating paint colors for the nursery. Mom nodded along, while Dad taped another box shut. It was like walking into a nightmare. The police are on their way, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. The room froze. 4 faces turned to me in shock. You called the police? Mom gasped, horror spreading across her features. On your own family? Yes. My hands were shaking, but I didn't waver. I asked you to leave. You refused. You forged my signature. You stole from me. I had no choice. Ryan jumped to his feet. You're having us arrested? I'm having you removed from my property, I corrected coldly. And I'm reporting the forgery of my signature, which is a crime. Dad's face turned red, his voice booming. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? I almost laughed, bitter and raw. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? When have you ever put my needs first? When have you respected my boundaries? You've taken, and now you want my house. Jenna clutched her belly, her eyes wide with mock horror. What kind of person calls the cops on her pregnant sister-in-law? The kind who finally realized family isn't supposed to exploit you, I shot back. We stood in standoff silence, the ticking clock on the wall the only sound. Then came the knock at the door. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, their expressions professional but concerned. We received a call about unwanted individuals in a residence, the female officer said. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Yes. I'm Claire Jennings. I'm the homeowner. I called because these people are in my home without permission and refuse to leave. Behind me, Dad jumped in, waving his arms. There's been a misunderstanding. We're her parents. This is her brother and his fiancée. It's a family matter. The officer looked at me. Is that correct? Yes, I admitted. They are family. But they are here without my consent. They've already removed some of my property, and they signed a lease in my name without authorization. The officers exchanged a glance. All right, let's talk this through, the male officer said, pulling out a notepad. And just like that, my world tilted again. My parents thought the word family would shield them from consequences. But this time, I wasn't going to let it. The living room felt like a courtroom, everyone waiting for a verdict. The 2 officers stepped inside, calm but firm, their radios crackling faintly. I stood straighter, trying not to look as shaken as I felt. Ma'am, the female officer said gently, you said you're the homeowner. Do you have proof of ownership? Yes. Relief surged through me. I keep my deed and mortgage statements in a fireproof safe upstairs. I can get them. Dad scoffed. This is absurd. We're her parents. She doesn't need to prove anything. We know what's best for her. The officer didn't even glance at him. We'll still need to see documentation. I hurried upstairs, my knees weak but my hands steady as I opened the safe. I grabbed the folder labeled house documents and clutched it to my chest like armor. When I returned, I laid the deed and mortgage statements on the coffee table, along with my driver's license. The male officer nodded, flipping through the papers. Claire Jennings. Yes, this matches. You're the legal owner. See? I said, heat creeping into my cheeks. This is my property. They're here without permission. They've already taken some of my belongings to another location, and they forged my signature on this lease. I held up the folded paper I'd found earlier, my fake signature scrawled at the bottom. The officer took it, studying it closely. Did you authorize anyone to sign this on your behalf? Absolutely not, I said firmly. Mom stepped forward, her voice trembling with indignation. We're her emergency contacts. We were just trying to help. She's overwhelmed, and that loft is closer to her job. We thought. Ma'am, the female officer cut in, being an emergency contact doesn't give you legal authority to sign contracts on someone's behalf. That requires power of attorney or other legal documentation. Do you have that? Mom faltered, glancing at Dad. Well, no, but... The officer shook her head. Then you had no legal right to sign this lease. Dad's face turned crimson. You don't understand. We're family. This isn't theft, it's support. We're looking out for her future. The officer's voice stayed calm, but her words were steel. Sir, adult children are not property. Miss Jennings is 30 years old. She has the right to make her own decisions about where she lives. Ryan jumped in, his voice rising with frustration. So what happens now? You just let her kick us out? We've already given notice at our apartment. Jenna's pregnant, we can't just go back. That's not Miss Jennings' problem, the male officer replied evenly. She never authorized this arrangement. The lease was signed fraudulently. She's not obligated to honor it. Jenna's eyes filled with tears, her hands pressing protectively against her belly. So we're just homeless now? Because she doesn't care about family? My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. You're not homeless. You had an apartment. You chose to give notice before confirming anything with me. That's on you, not me. The female officer turned to them. You need to gather your personal belongings and leave this residence immediately. Any items you've already removed must be returned. Otherwise, Miss Jennings can pursue theft charges. Dad exploded. Theft? You can't accuse us of stealing from our own daughter. Taking someone's property without permission is theft, the officer explained matter-of-factly. Regardless of your relationship. For once, Ryan looked stunned into silence. Mom's face crumpled, and Jenna sniffled loudly, as if the entire world had conspired against them. I stood there, gripping the back of a chair for balance, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time in my life, authority figures were siding with me instead of with Ryan or my parents. My boundaries weren't being dismissed as selfishness. They were being validated. Claire, Mom pleaded suddenly, turning her watery eyes on me. Don't do this. Think about what you're saying. We're your family. We raised you. Are you really willing to destroy our relationship over a house? Her words cut deep, the same guilt-laced refrain I'd heard my whole life. But something had shifted inside me. I wasn't that desperate little girl anymore, willing to sacrifice everything just to keep the peace. This isn't about a house, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I expected. It's about respect. About the fact that you all made huge decisions about my life without even asking me. You crossed every boundary I have, and now you're shocked that I'm not rolling over. Dad shook his head, disgust in his eyes. Ungrateful. After everything we've done for you. I laughed bitterly. After everything I've done for you, you mean? Paying your roof repairs. Covering Ryan's car bills. Helping Jenna when her insurance didn't. I've been generous, but generosity isn't the same as surrender. You don't get to take my house. The officers exchanged a look. All right, the male officer said firmly. It's time to wrap this up. Sir, ma'am, you need to leave now. Under their watchful eyes, my parents and Ryan gathered their coats and purses. Jenna clung to Ryan, whispering angrily, while Mom kept shooting me wounded looks. Dad muttered under his breath about betrayal and family duty. At the door, he turned back, his eyes blazing. This isn't over, Claire. You can't just cut us out like this. Yes, I can, I said, my voice sharp. And if you try anything like this again, I won't hesitate to press charges. The door closed behind them, the silence afterward almost unbearable. My house looked wrecked, boxes scattered, shelves half empty, but for the first time since walking in, it felt like mine again. The female officer turned to me with sympathy. Are you going to be okay? Do you have someone you can call to stay with you tonight? I thought of Erin, my best friend from college who had just passed the bar exam. She'd understand. She always did. Yes, I said quietly. I'll be okay. As the officers left, I sank onto the couch, my body trembling with the aftershocks. Everything was broken, but somewhere deep inside, a new strength had taken root. For once, I had stood my ground. That night I barely slept. Even with the police gone, the house felt invaded, like their presence still clung to the walls. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I sat in my half-packed living room, staring at the boxes my parents had touched, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. By morning, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I called Erin. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and alert. Claire. What's wrong? As soon as I explained, she was at my door 30 minutes later, armed with bagels, coffee, and the steady confidence I lacked. Erin and I had met in college. She'd gone on to law school, recently passed the bar, and had the kind of unflinching loyalty that made her the one person I knew I could trust completely. When I finished reliving the nightmare for her, she shook her head. They forged your signature, went through your finances, and tried to move you out of your own home. That's not just wrong, it's illegal. I know, I whispered, my throat tight. But they're my parents. My brother. Calling the police already feels like I crossed a line I can't uncross. Erin set her coffee down and leaned forward. Claire, they're the ones who crossed the line. You stood up for yourself. That's not betrayal, it's survival. Her words anchored me. The first thing she suggested was changing the locks. They had a spare key, right? You can't leave this place vulnerable. By noon, a locksmith had replaced every lock in the house. As I handed over my credit card, I felt a flicker of relief. Small, but real. My home was secure again, at least physically. Next came the cameras. Erin insisted on calling a security company, and by the end of the day, motion detectors and cameras were mounted discreetly around the porch, back door, and driveway. Watching the technician install them, I realized how naive I'd been to think I'd never need protection from my own family. While the technician worked, Erin pulled out her laptop. We need to file for a restraining order. A temporary one to start. The words made my stomach drop. A restraining order? Against my parents? Claire, they've already tried to steal your house and access your finances. You can't assume they'll stop because the police showed up once. If anything, they'll try harder. She was right. As much as I hated to admit it, I knew my family's patterns. Guilt trips, manipulation, even outright threats. They would do whatever it took to get their way. The only difference now was that I was refusing to comply. That afternoon, we went to the courthouse together. Standing before the clerk, explaining what had happened, I felt exposed. But when I laid out the forged lease, the missing belongings, and the police report, the clerk's expression hardened. By evening, a judge had granted a temporary restraining order. My parents, Ryan, and Jenna were barred from coming within 100 feet of my home or workplace for 30 days. A hearing would follow to determine if it should be extended. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt both lighter and heavier at once. Lighter, because for the first time, I had legal protection. Heavier, because I never thought I'd be the kind of person who needed a restraining order against her own family. When we got back to my house, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Dozens of missed calls and messages from aunts, cousins, even old family friends. How could you call the police on your parents? Ryan has a baby on the way, have you no compassion? After everything they've done for you, this is how you repay them? I showed Erin, my hands trembling. She scanned the messages and snorted. Classic. They're spinning the story to make you the villain. Conveniently leaving out the forgery and theft. Reading the words, I felt the familiar tug of guilt. But beneath it, something new stirred, anger. Not just at my parents, but at myself for letting them twist my sense of reality for so long. That night, as Erin and I sat on the couch with takeout cartons, surrounded by half-packed boxes, I finally said aloud what I'd been afraid to admit. I think I lost my family today. Erin squeezed my hand. No. You lost people who never respected you. There's a difference. And maybe, just maybe, you found yourself. Her words sank into me, soft but strong. For the first time in years, I believed them. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, the kind of mix that seeps into your clothes. I sat on a hard bench outside the hearing room, Erin beside me, her briefcase on her lap. My palms were damp, my heart a steady thud in my chest. I'd been in plenty of professional meetings and presentations, but this felt different. This wasn't about work. This was my life. They'll probably try to paint this as a misunderstanding, Erin said, scanning through her notes. Don't let it shake you. The facts are on your side. They forged your signature. They moved your belongings without consent. They violated your home. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. Facts might have been on my side, but I knew how persuasive my parents could be when they played the "we only wanted what's best" card. I had spent my entire life falling for it. The door opened, and the clerk called my name. My knees wobbled as I stood, but Erin gave me a firm nod, and I followed her into the courtroom. Inside, the judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, sat elevated behind the bench. My parents were already there, sitting side by side with Ryan and Jenna behind them. They looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because I was seeing them without the lens of guilt clouding my vision. Their lawyer, a smooth-talking man in a navy suit, rose first. "Your Honor, this is a family matter that has unfortunately escalated. My clients, loving parents and a devoted brother, may have overstepped, but their intentions were pure. They were simply trying to help Miss Jennings by arranging more suitable housing closer to her workplace." I almost laughed out loud. Pure intentions? Overstepped? He made it sound like they'd accidentally bought me the wrong birthday present, not tried to steal my home. Erin stood next, her voice steady, professional. "Your Honor, intentions are irrelevant when the actions are unlawful. My client's parents and brother entered her home without permission, removed her property, and signed a legally binding lease in her name without authorization. That is trespass, theft, and forgery. When she objected, they harassed her at her workplace and attempted to manipulate her into surrendering her rights. This isn't about a family misunderstanding, it's about boundaries and the law." The judge leaned forward, steepling her fingers. "Miss Jennings, do you confirm these facts?" I swallowed hard, my voice shaking but clear. "Yes, Your Honor. They went through my files, used my bank information, and signed a lease in my name. When I came home early from a work trip, they had already started packing my house." Mom's head snapped up, her eyes brimming with tears. "We're her parents. We were just trying to support her. She's always been stubborn, always thought she knew best. We thought she'd thank us." The judge's expression didn't soften. "Good intentions don't excuse breaking the law. Adults, even your children, have the right to make their own decisions." Dad muttered under his breath, his jaw tight. Ryan glared at me, whispering something to Jenna, who dabbed dramatically at her eyes with a tissue. After reviewing the documents, the deed, the forged lease, and the police report, the judge finally spoke. "This court finds sufficient grounds to extend the restraining order. The respondents are prohibited from contacting Miss Jennings or entering her home or workplace for 6 months. Violation of this order will result in legal consequences." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Relief flooded me, mingled with grief so sharp it nearly buckled my knees. 6 months. 6 months of peace, but also 6 months of silence from the people who were supposed to love me. As the room emptied, my parents avoided my eyes. Mom leaned heavily on Dad's arm, looking as if the weight of the world had just landed on her shoulders. Ryan shot me one last venomous look before guiding Jenna out. When they were gone, Erin touched my shoulder. "You did it. You stood up for yourself." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "It doesn't feel like winning." "Maybe not right now," she said gently. "But give it time. Freedom often feels heavy at first." Walking out of the courthouse into the cool Portland air, I realized she was right. It wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming my voice, my home, my life. And for the first time in years, I could almost breathe. The weeks after the court hearing felt strange, like I was learning how to live in my house again. It still looked half disassembled from the day my parents invaded, boxes stacked in corners, shelves empty where my belongings had been hauled to the loft without my permission. But now, every time I walked through the front door, I felt a wave of relief. No one else was here. No one else had a claim. It was mine. I started by unpacking. Each box I opened was both painful and empowering. There were moments I'd pull out a stack of my design books and remember the sting of realizing they'd been stolen, and yet placing them back on the shelves made me feel whole again. I scrubbed every surface, repainted the scratches on the baseboards, and even replaced the curtains my mother had stuffed into a box. Little by little, the Victorian became my sanctuary once more. Aaron checked on me constantly, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just showing up with Thai food and a bottle of wine. "You need to build new rituals here," she said one night, curled on my sofa with chopsticks in hand. "Right now this house holds too much of their shadow. Make it yours again." So I did. I hosted a small dinner for a few coworkers, something I'd been too anxious to do before. I joined a local book club and volunteered my house for one of the meetings. I even started a small container garden on the back porch, filling it with herbs and flowers that made me smile each morning. Every new layer of life I added pushed the memory of that awful day further into the background. Work, too, began to change. Without the constant weight of family expectations, I poured more of myself into my projects. My designs grew bolder, more inventive, and clients noticed. A month after the court order, my boss called me into her office with a smile. "Claire, the Jennings project was incredible. We're promoting you to lead designer on the next eco-brand campaign." For a moment I couldn't speak. The word promotion had always felt out of reach, as if I didn't deserve it no matter how hard I worked. But now, for the first time, I believed it. The nights were still the hardest. Sometimes I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of my father's voice, "We're your parents. We know what's best." Or my mother's wounded plea, "Are you really choosing a house over your family?" Those words still cut, but my therapist, Dr. Kim, a family dynamic specialist Aaron recommended, helped me untangle them. "Claire," she said gently during one session, "imagine a friend told you this story. Their parents forged their signature, broke into their home, and tried to take it away. Would you tell them they were overreacting by calling the police?" I shook my head. "No. I'd tell them to press charges." "Exactly. So why hold yourself to a different standard just because it's your family?" Her words stayed with me. I began to see the years of small sacrifices for what they were, not proof of love, but proof of manipulation. Paying Ryan's bills, covering my parents' emergencies, always being the dependable one, it wasn't kindness anymore. It was exploitation. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Slowly, I built a life that wasn't centered on pleasing them. I went hiking on weekends, joined a yoga class, and even signed up for a ceramics workshop just because I'd always wanted to try. For the first time, my energy wasn't siphoned away by family drama, it was mine to spend as I chose. Of course, my family didn't disappear. They couldn't reach me directly because of the restraining order, but extended relatives filled the gap. My aunt left me voicemails calling me heartless. A cousin sent me a Facebook message accusing me of abandoning Ryan and Jenna in their time of need. But others, my godmother, an old family friend, reached out with quiet support. "You did the right thing," one text read. "Don't let them convince you otherwise." Those words mattered more than I realized. One Saturday morning, I sat in my studio, the bay window glowing with sunlight, sketching ideas for a freelance project. The drafting table was cluttered, my plants slightly wilted from neglect, but it felt alive again. I paused, pencil in hand, and realized I wasn't just rebuilding my house. I was rebuilding myself. The Victorian no longer felt like a battlefield. It was becoming what I had always wanted it to be, a home filled with laughter, creativity, and peace. My peace. 6 months passed faster than I expected. When the restraining order finally expired, I felt two things at once: relief that it had done its job, and dread that its protection was gone. I had no idea if my parents or Ryan would try to show up on my doorstep the moment the clock struck midnight. But the days passed quietly. The cameras I'd installed caught only neighborhood cats and Amazon deliveries. No one came. Then, 2 weeks later, a card arrived in the mail. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unmistakably my mother's. My first instinct was to throw it straight into the trash, but curiosity tugged harder. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a simple birthday card. "Happy 31st, Claire. We hope you're well. We'd like to talk if you're willing. Love, Mom and Dad. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a thin olive branch extended over 6 months of silence. I stared at it for a long time before calling Erin. What do I do with this? I asked, pacing the living room. Whatever you want, she said firmly. You don't owe them a response. But if you do want to meet, do it on your terms. Neutral ground. Public place. And keep your boundaries clear. For days, I wrestled with the decision. Part of me wanted to slam the door forever, to keep my hard-won peace intact. But another part, the part that still remembered family dinners and holiday mornings, wanted at least to hear them out. In the end, I agreed to meet them for coffee at a cafe downtown. Neutral ground, just as Erin advised. When I arrived, Mom and Dad were already seated at a corner table. Mom looked older somehow, lines etched deeper into her face. Dad's shoulders slumped in a way I didn't remember. They both stood as I approached, tentative smiles tugging at their lips. Claire, Mom said softly, as if testing the sound of my name. I sat down without returning the smile. You wanted to talk. Dad cleared his throat. We didn't handle things well. That's an understatement, I said flatly. Mom flinched but nodded. You're right. We overstepped. We thought we were helping, but we see now how it looked. We just wanted to make sure Ryan and Jenna had a safe place for the baby. I waited for the words I needed most, we're sorry. They didn't come. Instead, Dad sighed. We know we lost your trust. We want to fix that, if you'll let us. I folded my hands in my lap, grounding myself. Therapy had taught me that boundaries weren't walls, they were doors I could open and close as I chose. And right now, I wasn't ready to open them fully. I'm not interested in pretending nothing happened, I said. You tried to take my home. You forged my signature. That isn't something I can just sweep under the rug. Mom's eyes watered. We were desperate, Claire. Ryan. I cut her off. This isn't about Ryan. It's about me. About the way you've treated me my entire life, as the one who fixes everything, who gives until there's nothing left. I'm done with that role. Silence fell. Dad stared at the table, his jaw tight. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Finally, I leaned forward. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it has to look different. You don't get to show up at my house uninvited. You don't get access to my finances. You don't get to guilt me into giving up pieces of my life for Ryan. If you can respect that, maybe we can start over. If you can't, then this coffee is the last time we'll see each other. The words hung between us like a challenge. For the first time, neither of them argued. Dad finally nodded. We hear you. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability. But it was something. When I left the cafe, I didn't feel the warmth of reconciliation, nor the sting of rejection. Instead, I felt clarity. My parents could choose to meet me at my boundaries, or they could drift out of my life. Either way, I would be okay. That night, sitting in my studio with the evening light spilling across my drafting table, I realized the strangest thing. I didn't feel like the child begging for approval anymore. I felt like the adult setting the terms. And that, I realized, was its own kind of peace. A year later, I woke up in a house that finally felt like home again. The Victorian was no longer haunted by the memory of boxes and forged signatures. Instead, it held sunlight in every corner, laughter in its walls, and the steady rhythm of my life lived on my own terms. The porch swing creaked softly as I sipped my morning coffee, watching the neighborhood stir awake. My garden bloomed, herbs spilling from pots and lavender scenting the breeze. It was ordinary, peaceful, and exactly what I had fought for. Work thrived too. Leading campaigns that once seemed out of reach, I finally believed I belonged where I was. Confidence had replaced the quiet exhaustion of trying to prove myself. The house mirrored that change, once fragile, now grounded. My parents had kept their distance since our coffee meeting. There were the occasional texts, pictures of Ryan's baby, clipped updates, but nothing more. Ryan himself hadn't reached out at all. Sometimes I wondered if he still saw me as selfish, but the thought no longer consumed me. His silence was its own answer. Did it hurt? Yes, but not like before. The ache was real, but it didn't control me. It reminded me that boundaries come with cost and worth. Therapy had taught me that respect is non-negotiable, even with family. Especially with family. On the anniversary of that day, I invited friends over. Aaron raised a toast to the bravest homeowner in Portland, and laughter spilled through the parlor like music. I stepped out to the porch for a moment, glass in hand, looking up at the stars. I thought of the woman I'd been a year ago, cornered, trembling in the bathroom, terrified to make the call that would change everything. And then I thought of who I had become, someone who chose herself. Someone who understood that keeping the house was never the real victory. The real victory was keeping my dignity. I lifted my glass to the night sky. To new beginnings, I whispered. And this time, I meant it.